I just finished Trials of Mana, and I enjoyed that far more than I could have ever hoped for. Again, I'm trying this more casual stream of consciousness style review, less formal, and more just me. Also, this isn't replacing normal videos, I just wanted to try a different way of talking about new games that just came out. That way, my channel isn't always retro stuff, am I right? Anyway, please let me know if you dig these kind of new games reviews in the comments. I am looking for some genuine feedback here. I think it's only fair that to talk about Trials of Mana, it needs the context of the original game. It's a remake of the third Mana game, known as Seiken Densetsu 3 in Japan, and it was released on the Super Nintendo. It got a fan translation in the late 90s, and I emulated the crap out of it. Seiken Densetsu 3 is easily one of my top 5 Super Nintendo games. If you love the original Secret of Mana like many do, Seiken Densetsu 3 completely blows it out of the water and is better in almost every single imaginable way. It's that good. So keep in mind that I'm talking about Trials of Mana with the experience and admitted nostalgia goggles for the SNES game. I got to have that knowledge and feelings of seeing areas, enemies, cutscenes, and gameplay reimagined for current consoles. I'm not saying take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, but rather to remember that as a disclaimer. Trials of Mana is one of the most faithful remakes I've ever had the pleasure of playing, both good and bad. It updates the original, but not only makes quality of life changes, but pure gameplay changes that are significant improvements over its source material. If you're not familiar with the Mana series, it's an RPG action game where you run around, fight a bunch of enemies, level up, go to town for cutscenes and equipment upgrades, fight more dudes, lather, rinse, repeat. It's pretty much a glorified beat-em-up with RPG mechanics implemented. What makes Trials of Mana different, and different from every other entry in the series, is the customization and the replayability of it. To start, there are 6 playable characters, but you choose your main hero and the 2 supporting party members. Each has their own prologue, story beats, cutscene dialogue, and interactions that the others don't. More importantly, who you choose affects the end of the game. There are 3 different final dungeons and 3 different final bosses, and who your hero is determines what each of those are. Everything in the middle is basically the same for everyone, so it isn't a drastically different playthrough, but the end sequence and changes are really cool to see and adds in a lot of replayability. That is, of course, if you could enjoy the core gameplay loop, which is a lot of fighting enemies. Unlike the original or Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana adds in aerial attacks, light and strong attacks, dodge rolls, and combos. This provides much more variety to the combat than any other Mana game, as there's much more involvement than just spamming attacks and hoping your stats are good enough to not be hit. This is evident by enemies using MMO-like red zones, letting you know where magic or special attacks are coming from, giving you a window to get out of the way, jump over it, or dodge out as soon as you can. This can get chaotic, especially during certain boss battles, but the feeling of getting out of the way in time is much better than just seeing if you can withstand the blow or resist it. Combat is a huge improvement over the original and most Mana games. Other improvements are how easy it is to switch between characters mid-combat, and any and all casting or item use no longer completely freezes the world while it casts like the original Mana games. That said, it still isn't so involved that it requires a lot of brain power, and it can get to be very, very repetitive. If after one look at this gameplay and you're thinking to yourself, I don't think I'd like playing that, you're right. You won't, and you won't like the game. There really isn't anything to do here besides fight a lot of shit. And that's one of the downsides to it being such a faithful remake. In the SNES era, this was considered acceptable and plenty to enjoy. Just running around and fighting stuff was enough to carry the game throughout without much evolution and variety. By today's standards, it is a repetitive slog and most people will get bored of it. I absolutely loved it throughout, but it's also a game from my era, and I'm more accustomed to this kind of gameplay. It's a Super Nintendo game, dressed up like a PlayStation 2 game, released alongside PlayStation 4 games. And I love it for that. I didn't really have many gameplay issues all in all. The AI is actually fairly competent. You can see them dodge out of the way when area attacks are coming and generally keep up with using healing items and spells. This is helped by the extensive companion behavior options, letting you tweak how aggressive they are, with what skills, and who to focus. This kind of stuff is great, and I'm happy with how intuitive it works in the remake. The AI was generally smart enough to keep itself alive, except for when it wasn't. There are still moments that you could practically see the algorithm telling it to get away and just rolling into danger, or just not attempting at all and getting wrecked. And in boss battles where there are multiple targets available, especially ones that need to be destroyed to prevent devastating attacks, the AI companions become unreliable. And it's in moments like that I weep for the biggest omission from this game, multiplayer. The original Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo is known for having 3 players. Seiken Densetsu 3 had 2 players, and the Trials of Mana Remake has 1. That's it. I understand not having local multiplayer because the new camera system and all that, but my god, what online multiplayer would have been awesome. Even if it required everyone having their own copy and only during combat, I don't care, that would have been worth it to me. It would have been that fun. And multiplayer was such a strong highlight for so many other entries in the Mana series. It not being here is painfully apparent and is my biggest complaint with the game. Probably the biggest improvement it did was the level up system. As you level up, you get essentially skill points to put into stats. Rather than increasing the raw stat itself, putting in so many skill points get different abilities, stat increases, and passive skills. The skill system is fantastic and provides further customization. There are tons of skills for everyone, and you earn universal skills from important NPCs and story events, and there's tons of hidden ones. In a way, it makes it so that almost any stat build of any character is viable in a certain way. It felt like I was able to create actual character builds instead of just dumping points into whatever looks like it does the most damage. My final team was Durand being a massive tank, able to heal, provoke, and absorb damage for party members, which allowed him to constantly build his class strike meter. Reese buffs the whole team with everything and then uses summons, and Hawkeye attacked, used spells when needed, and doubled my item drops. That is just one viable build. I could have had Hawkeye constantly poisoning enemies or throwing stuff. There are a ton of options. A huge improvement, and I love this system. It was a delight to play around with. And much like the original game, Trials of Mana also has every character able to obtain class changes. That alone further added in tons of replayability in the original game, and it's the same here. Thankfully, they balanced the game more and made it easier and more reasonable to obtain class changes at a decent pace. And even better, the remake allows you to undo class changes and respec your skill points whenever you want. There's a light and dark path at the class change, and then another light and dark path for each class after that. 6 total different classes to possibly play with for each of the 6 characters. That's nuts, and they're all very different. Hawkeye becoming a ranger using traps is very different than Hawkeye becoming a ninja and using elemental ninjutsu. Even better, the new costumes for everyone look great, or if it sucks, you can switch to an older outfit, which is more important because fashion matters to me. All of this customization and different builds and paths and characters is what makes the core gameplay loop so enjoyable for me. This is an RPG with a fantastic sense of progression and individuality with how you build your team and choose to play them. It makes the constant, somewhat repetitive combat rewarding for all the skill stuff. An important note though, this game is really easy, almost insultingly easy. If you played the original, definitely play on hard mode and you'll be fine. I played on hard throughout and had no trouble, and only a handful of bosses caused some actual close calls. If you haven't played this game before, but have played any RPG before in your life, I still say play on hard. You can always try it and change difficulties at any time too. I'm not over the moon with everything here though. The voice acting is, how do I put this, bad. It's bad.
I don't know. One moment he was looking at the Mana Stone, and the next, he was after me!
Some characters certainly sound better than others.
Curses! This is Isabella's doing, I know it.
But that isn't saying much. It isn't just the voice actor's fault, as there's some clearly poor voice direction in here.
Barry filled me in on your plight while you were fighting. Telepathy is great, huh?
At the same time, this is the first role for a majority of the voice actors, and most of them sound like the developers just went to Newgrounds and randomly picked someone out of the forums.
I hear ya. That lady, royal beast of the Firestone. Take me with you. Then we can all make her pay. She's gonna get it.
There are many voices that just don't fit the character that they're playing. Thankfully, there is a Japanese voiceover option, so you can pretend that it sounds better since you don't understand what they're saying. While the voices are mostly pretty bad, the music is fantastic. The original soundtrack is one of my favorites of all time, and I love the way they redid the music for Trials of Mana. They essentially took whatever instrument the original game was attempting to sound like, and then just used that instrument. It works so well because they didn't try to update or modernize the music at all. It stayed faithful in the best possible way. Every new version of every song sounds incredible, but also sounds just like the original track. You can go to the options and switch between the original OST or the remakes, and you can't go wrong with either. That's how good the music is. I'm not going to talk about the story at all, because it's pretty lackluster in every sense of the word. It was never deep to begin with, and it isn't expanded upon at all in the remake. Nothing new was added to the story, and there aren't going to be any mind-blowing moments that will really stick out to you. This game is about its gameplay far more than anything. And without going into spoilers, There is all new post-game content that did not exist in the original. It rewards more skills and further class changing, and it isn't worth it. It's essentially one long-ass dull dungeon that's about 6 times as long as every dungeon before it. It became quite the grind, and the new secret boss at the end was pretty uninteresting compared to some of the bosses before it. And you have to do the post-game dungeon in order to unlock the New Game Plus mode. But hey, at least there is a New Game Plus mode, making it easier to see every character and every final boss. Trials of Mana really showcases just how poor the Secret of Mana remake was in comparison. If you played that one and felt disheartened by it, fret not, it is a much better effort here. I really enjoyed my entire playthrough, which ended at about 26 hours or so with the post-game. I'm honestly probably going to try some New Game Plus runs because I enjoyed it that much. The most difficult question I find myself asking is, what would I recommend playing? The Trials of Mana remake, or the Super Nintendo original, which is available on the Collection of Mana for the Switch? I don't think there's a wrong answer here. I have a lot of nostalgia and fondness for the original, and it still has some of its own merit. The pixel artwork is the absolute finest the Super Nintendo has to offer. And Trials of Mana changed Booskaboo's name to Vuskov, which is unacceptable. He will always be Booskaboo to me. I really don't think you can go wrong with either one. If I had to choose, I'd give the ever so slightest of edge to the Super Nintendo game because it has 2-player co-op, and that's it. That's the only reason. Trials of Mana is such a faithful remake that it feels like a modern Super Nintendo RPG. From its gameplay, to its graphic style, to its simplistic story, to its replayability. That doesn't come without hangups like I mentioned throughout, and definitely keep that in mind that it isn't a very deep, compelling game by today's standards. I loved it and had fun every minute throughout, but that's because I knew what it was trying to be and enjoyed it for what that was decades ago. This may not be the same for you, but if you feel like it might be up your alley, I can easily recommend it. Trials of Mana earns a 7 out of 10.